Worship leaders, I have a question for you. What do you do when you feel at your wit's end and you might even feel like quitting and just giving up completely on worship leading? I've been there several times in my worship leading career where I just have felt like I'm a fraud up here. I'm not connecting as much as I used to with the Holy Spirit while I'm leading worship. I feel like I'm faking. I feel like I'm a failure. You know, all the different things that can come against us in the week out in and week out of worship leading. But I want to draw your attention to a tiny little Bible verse in the book of Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount. It's Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. And Jesus says, he says this, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Kind of a cryptic Bible verse that we're going to look at here in just a second. But before we look at that, I want to give the context of Matthew chapter 5, and that's found in Matthew chapter 4. At the end of Matthew chapter 4, you can look this up later. It talks about Jesus, going throughout and he's preaching, and he's literally, he's experiencing what we might call in modern day terms revival. He's seeing signs, wonders, healings, all kinds of amazing things happening. And I imagine at the end of Matthew chapter 4, Jesus kind of, hushing the crowd, if you will, in the midst of this amazing healing service where signs and wonders are happening. And he kind of backs up and begins to back up onto this hillside, right, where he would deliver the Sermon on the Mount address. And he kind of quiets the crowd. And if I was there in that crowd that day and I had seen, all these people getting healed, these amazing things happening, I would say, okay, man, teach me your ways. How can I do that in my city? I want to take that home with me. And yet Jesus doesn't do that. He opens up his mouth in the book of Matthew chapter 5, as I just said, and he delivers this. The first things out of his mouth, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It's like, no, that's not quite what I was looking for. Can you talk about the 5 steps of how to have a guaranteed healing, or how to have amazing revival services and get people saved in my city? Maybe try again. And Jesus continues in Matthew chapter 5, verse 4. He says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." It's like, man, this guy's 0 for 2. He's a great healer, but he's a horrible preacher. That must be what it is, right? He continues in Matthew chapter 5. He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." And I'm like, okay, Jesus, you've lost me. Those first 3 points, I just don't understand what you're saying. And of course, Jesus is giving what we now have as the Beatitudes. And there's 8 Beatitudes. We're not going to go through them all here. But my point in saying this is this. Jesus is saying, even in the midst of times of incredible church services, incredible revival, whatever it is, there's going to come a point, the point of the whole of human existence is for what? For us to say yes to the Holy Spirit who dwells inside of us, to be as close to Jesus as possible. As John the Baptist says, he says, "I want more of you and less of me," right? And he says, sometimes you're going to feel strong in that. Sometimes you're going to feel like this passion inside of you, the Holy Spirit working inside of you and bearing witness with everything that you're feeling. It's like, I'm giving Jesus my all today. It's going to be a fantastic worship service. I'm going to go to work and get my whole school saved, or whatever it is, right? But then there will be other times, is what he's telling us in the book of Matthew. He says, where you're going to feel incredibly poor in spirit, where you're going to feel like you have nothing to offer in and of yourself. And here's pretty much the point of the law in the Old Testament, a quick summation. I'm not going to give a whole teaching on that, but really the point of the law in the whole Old Testament, all these rules, all these regulations for the Israelites to follow was this one thing. You can't do it. You cannot do that. It's impossible to do in and of yourself. You need someone to come in your place. You need power inside of you to actually help you accomplish and walk out what I've called you to do, right? And so now here we are in the New Testament, no longer under that, but the Lord still says, hey, I want you to resist sin. I want you to pursue righteousness. And he's saying, you're going to feel poor in spirit at times. It says, and don't be depressed by that. Don't think that, oh man, I missed the boat on that, though that might be true. He says, the one who feels like that, poor in spirit, that one will have my kingdom. Why? Because when you've come to the end of yourself and you feel poor in spirit as a worship leader at your job, as a parent, as, whatever it is, that's when in your weakness, his strength is made strong. And it's like almost one of the main points that Jesus is asking us. He's like, all I want is you to love me with everything. And it's as if everything in this world is like pressing against that happening to keep us unholy, unrighteous, distracted, full of lesser loves, drinking from broken cisterns, as the book of Jeremiah calls it. And the Lord's like, all I want is your heart. So as a worship leader, you might be watching this and feeling, pretty decent about your worship leading career, what you're doing. Or you might be a worship leader watching this and saying, I really feel kind of at my wit's end. I really feel like I could quit worship leading tomorrow, take 5, 10, 15 years off, and I'd be all good. And I feel like it's something that the Lord says clearly in the Beatitudes, in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, actually, when you come to that place, now I'm not saying don't take a break. Taking breaks is amazing. Having weeks off, building your team in a place where you actually are in the room sometimes. There's all kinds of practical things. I'm not just saying, well, just keep barreling ahead and lead 50 times a year. That's not what that's actually really not healthy. If you're doing that, you need to raise someone up underneath you to help you carry that weight, right? But what Jesus is saying is, he's like, when you've had the worst week, when you had the horrible argument on the way to church, when you lost your temper, even at your team or at, your spouse or your kids, whatever it is, watch me move in strength on your behalf. Yours is the kingdom. When you have just that emptiness in and of yourself, you're poor in spirit. There's actually a progression that happens in these Beatitudes. You're going to see mourning begin to happen. And then what's going to happen? Meekness will be produced, and it continues on down the line. You're going to hunger and thirst for righteousness, right? You're going to be a peacemaker unto ultimately the last one is, giving of yourself, loving not your life, even unto death when you're persecuted, right? So the Lord is near to you, even in the midst of your weakness, if you simply turn your heart towards him and say, God, I really don't have what it takes. He says, that's what I wanted. Now I can come in. And it's not your strength, it's my strength within you from the Holy Spirit, the great helper that I have sent to you, where now we can actually begin to say, the kingdom is yours, my son, the kingdom is yours, my daughter. Do with it and proclaim it from the platform as a worship leader. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.